years until I managed to get to the biggest and most successful club in the Midlands at the time, and managed that, and running a massive, it was a 3,500 capacity venue, live acts, Radio 1 DJs, chart acts playing there. It became, I was earning money that I could only have dreamt of really in those days. About 43 by this time, and I discovered someone who could get hold of heroin.
Thank you for joining me.
It's my pleasure, Conor. Thank you. It's nice to be here. Thank you for asking me.
Where are you from, Tim? Where did you grow up?
Right, I was born on the Wirral in Merseyside, little village called Irby in 1960. Born to in a sort of a semi-professional family, if you like. My father was a bank manager, and my mother was a physiotherapist. So what you'd suppose in those days, you could be sort of very respectable middle-class family. But unfortunately, it was a particularly unhappy childhood. Basically, my mother and father were constantly arguing. There's a lot of shouting and screaming in the house. I remember that from being very, very young. And when me and my brother were I was 7, he was 5, my father disappeared and we never saw him again. There was no explanation as such. He just went, and my mother disintegrated and started drinking heavily and using pills to cope. So that sort of left me a very worried and timid and nervous child who was painfully shy, uncomfortable around people. And that was my sort of early years, if you like. Yeah.
How would you describe then, moving into the teenage years, the absence of your father probably left an enormous hole, that male presence in your life? What happened when you moved into your teenage years? How did you cope?
Yeah, it was in my teenage years. I obviously went to grammar school, and because of having no sort of male role model, although there were, my granddad and my nana and granddad had to step in, and he was sort of a male role model, but he wasn't around all the time because he was a very busy man. They were running a business. But in school, people found out very quickly. Children are very cruel, aren't they? So, and we didn't have much money then, because in those days there was maintenance payments around divorces and stuff like that. There wasn't the same, legal stuff around it, and my mum had to survive on a pittance and just help from my grandparents. So we dressed differently, me and my brother. We were in sort of different types, second-hand clothes, if you like. We looked different, and they soon found out I had no father. So I was remorselessly bullied for several years, probably, and made to feel sort of different, which made me isolate. There was no male figure, if you like, that I could go and talk to about that, about the way I was feeling. And I sort of repressed those emotions inside, if you like, until. But I found that if I could make people laugh, that was how I could become accepted. So I was the character at school who would always do the crazy things, the nutter things, to make people laugh and to become accepted into the group, if you like. Usually the bad group as well, like, the ones that were the tearaways. And that was the story of my teenage years, really, just getting into scrapes and getting into trouble. So,
but also you probably would have become quite self-conscious, and there would have been an effect on your self-esteem from the bullying, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I used to feel, I felt different anyway. I always had this feeling of, and I felt that for many years, I felt different than everyone else. And if anyone looked at me, I would blush. I would feel, my self-esteem was a really low ebb all the time. I had no self-worth really either at that time. I just knew that if I could, by doing crazy things and making people laugh, in those early years, that I would gain some sort of acceptance. But no, I had no self-esteem.
Despite that early childhood trauma, which is essentially what it is, and difficulties, you became very successful. Talk to me about
Yeah.
that.
Yep.
Journey.
Through a set of circumstances, really. I managed to get out of school. I managed to pass my O levels. Everyone was telling me constantly that I wasn't going to pass anything. I would never amount to anything. That was always bombarded. Teachers told me that. In fact, a lot of family told me that because I was always in trouble. But I managed to get O levels, and I managed to get to college and do a hotel and catering management, OND it was in those days, and fell into sort of trainee hotel management. Got moved to Cambridge with Trust House 40 as it was in those days. I was, I trained in every department, and I did well in it. I got up to duty manager level. But then through another bizarre set of circumstances, I found myself falling into the nightclub business. There was a very successful nightclub in Cambridge called Relapse, and they were advertising for a doors manager and assistant manager. And just through a whim, really, I applied for it and got an interview, got in, and just found I was in my heaven, if you like. I found I instantly clicked. I could do this. I knew it was a sort of instinct. I sort of knew what people wanted, and very quickly I rose up in that and got promoted and transferred to Leicester to run a club called Isabella's, which was a very successful nightclub in the centre of Leicester. And that went on for about 8-9 years, running clubs until I managed to get to the biggest and most successful club in the Midlands at the time, and managed that, and running a massive, it was a 3,500 capacity venue, live acts, Radio 1 DJs, chart acts playing there, and 8 bars, 3 floors it was on. That was a club called Mr. Keese's, which is no longer exists actually, but I got all this in my early 20s, too young to cope with it really, but yes, became, I was earning money that I could only have dreamt of really in those days, and did that until I met my wife actually, and then we went on to work together, running big pubs, restaurants and hotels for many years after that, as a management couple, all over the place, Midlands, the south of England. So yeah.
So you built this, you built this career, plus you build a family unit.
Yeah,
right?
2 beautiful young daughters.
Right. So everything is perfect, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, there was always issues around. If I look back on it now, I can look back at there was a lot of recreational drug use, for instance, in my nightclub days. I was using amphetamines and cocaine recreationally, if you like, but it's quite, I was given it, so I never had to pay for it. So I was just using it willy-nilly, really, although it didn't ever seem a problem to me. And always my drinking from my teenage years, I've been someone who was always the last person to leave, if you like, would always want another drink, even though I was like staggering. You could never ask me to just go out for a pint. That would be unthinkable. That would be no good to me. I was party or nothing, so there was sort of binging went on, and there was, I would call it, I suppose, if I look back now, I didn't see it as a problem, but it was problem drinking in those early years. So
in the nightclub role, you would have had quite a high status position, right? So here's where the free drugs are coming from, and you're a big guy in the room.
But in that town, in the Midlands, Birmingham and Leicester, people knew who I was, and I mean, there were times I had to walk around with security behind me because there were people who were looking for me, that couldn't get into the club and stuff like that. It was a fairly high-profile position. We were always in the newspapers as well for various stuff. So yeah, it was people watching all the time. So yeah.
So tell me then, the drinking started in the teenage years. Can you remember your first drink? Can you remember that feeling? Can you remember what that was like?
Yeah.
What age?
I can now, looking back on it. now I know what I'm looking for. I suppose even from a very, very young age, from certainly my teenage years, as soon as I could get into a pub, if you like, I wanted to change the way I felt. I didn't want to feel like I felt inside all the time. And that was always worried, nervous, anxious, less than, shy, you name it. Uncomfortable in my own skin is the only way I can describe it. And I remember taking a drink that first time I took a drink, and all of that disappearing. And I realized then that was a very quick and easy way to change the way I felt.
So it was like an anesthetic for social anxiety.
Oh, yeah. And I suppose that if I look back, although I was sort of partying in those years, and it was part of the culture, I was still using it for that, just to be included, if you like, just to, although it hadn't developed into a dependency then, it was, there was some problems. There were blackouts, there were times I can't remember. There were times I did really stupid things. I remember being arrested when I was 17 at a Thin Lizzy concert for being drunk and incapable. I mean, that wasn't particularly, and the guy I went with, left there fairly sober. So it was me, I always went that extra. But like I say, I just saw that as gaining kudos, not really an issue at the time.
Yeah, kind of a macho type of thing. And culturally,
yeah.
In these islands, Northern Europe in particular, there's a kind of machismo associated in the past, at least in the 80s and 90s, with drinking, right?
Definitely.
So you're successful, you're running the nightclubs. At this point, are you drinking every day?
Not really. No, I could, like I say, the physical dependency, even then if I go into my 30s, just jump forward a little bit. Like I say, we were running then with my wife. We were running restaurants, pubs, and hotels. It was Beefeater we started with, and then we moved around like big breweries. We were running big businesses. 60, 70, 80 staff, and hotels attached to them and whatever. And we had 2 children, 2 beautiful girls, and there were periods then of sobriety where I would just take time off from drink, if you like, in my 30s, and there were times. I mean, I remember taking it. It was a couple of years off from it and running marathons. But if I look back at that behaviour, that's very addictive. I became addicted to that behavior. I ran 6 marathons in the end. I'm a big chap, I'm not really built for marathon running. Ended up running like 1 New York marathon, 3 London marathons, like just craziness really. And I've got a metal hip now, actually, which is because of that. So, that all or nothing nature, if you like. But I wasn't drinking every day then. That was, like I say, there were sort of big gaps in my, particularly into my 30s, because from the outside, people looking in at my life then, my beautiful wife, 2 beautiful children, materially, someone looking in at my life would say, well, he's got everything going on. He's in a great, I had all the flash jewelry, the car, all the stuff that people place importance on. But inside I was dying. Inside, I can remember even during those times, feeling discontent, irritable, something's missing, always wanting more, never satisfied. It was like a gnawing inside of me all the time. And I still, with all that what I had, I still felt less than everybody else and different. It's craziness really, isn't it? But
yeah, but I do think it is quite common what you're talking about. I have a suspicion that it is a lot more common. You gain all the trappings, you do everything right, you're a success story, you're even running marathons, you have the wife, you have the kids, you have cash in the bank, you have the cars, the house, everything, and the emptiness is still there. And we've heard this story over and over and over again. So at what point, so you're in your 30s, you have 2 kids, at what point did it start to become a problem, like a real problem?
Right. Well, very, strangely, it wasn't until my early 40s that I mean, there were the odd occasion in my 30s when I would my wife wouldn't be talking to me because of drunken behaviours. But it wasn't, you know, these were occasions that would happen, but it was never sort of daily stuff that was going on, or it was never considered, or I never considered it a problem. But in my early 40s is when things started to go downhill, if you like. And probably, ironically, that was when we were probably at our most successful. So I don't know whether that was an age thing, or I don't know. People talk about midlife crises, don't they? But I can tell you when the exact moment that things started to go downhill, and that was when I hurt my back, and I was lifting in the cellar. I was lifting barrels in the cellar. I hurt my back. Went to the doctors, and she prescribed me codeine for my back. And in those days, we're talking about sort of late 90s, I suppose, early 2000s. You know, it was quite easy. I mean, there's much more care goes on around a lot of the prescribing these days, but yeah, it was fairly. And I knew her anyway. She was a regular in the pub, so you know, I got codeine. Never taken it really before.
Codeine is an opiate extract. Does it come from the opiate?
Yeah, it comes from the poppy codeine. Yeah, it's just a lesser form of morphine, really. Okay. It's basically the first stop of the doctor will give you. I mean, normally in England they would prescribe codeine mixed with paracetamol, like a mixture of it. But she just gave me 30 milligram tablets of codeine because my back pain was genuine at that time. It was you know, it was painful. And I remember it distinctly, and I can remember it to this day, taking that codeine, and every single problem that I had, all those feelings I've just talked about, melted away, and I felt like I was wrapped in this warm cotton wool, if you like. Nothing could hurt me. Confidence, relaxed, no anxiety. And that was the beginning of an extremely slippery slope, because any opiate addict will tell you that doesn't matter what the opiate is, you'll never recreate that first feeling anyway. You can only supplement it. And that's when it's slippery slope started, because it sort of escalated from there, really. My issues and the drinking went from that point where I was, you know, it very quickly escalated to her prescribing me MST tablets. I was lying to her, telling her how bad my back was. And she was prescribing me MST, which was morphine sulfate tablets. Again, this would be much more difficult to do these days. And it went on and on. I was using up prescriptions, asking for repeat prescriptions, and becoming dependent on morphine, basically on opiates.
So this is in your early 40s, Tim, right? So
yes. Yeah, in my early 40s this was. And this sort of, and I managed to keep that secret from my family, because unless you're sort of, you're dropping off to sleep and nodding off and slurring, people tend not to notice when things like that, unless they know what they're looking for. So I managed to hide that. But when the doctors stopped prescribing me because they got wise to it, I then had to find, because I didn't want the withdrawal. I knew there would be a horrendous withdrawal. So I started.
How did the doctors get wise to it?
Just because of the sheer quantities I was asking for, and they were refusing to fill the repeat prescriptions. They got what she called me in one day and had a chat with me about it. The doctor privately said, we need to wean you off these. So they just prescribed me like a weaning off dose, if you like.
How long had you been on them at that stage?
Probably 8-9 months, I would probably say, to get to that level. But it only takes really, if you're taking opiates like that, then it only takes really 8 to 14 days before you've got a dependency. And then things really got out of hand then, because I couldn't get them, and I didn't want to go to withdrawal. So I started drinking to counteract, you know, when I couldn't get hold of codeine. Then I started going to chemists and buying Nurofen Plus tablets. I don't know if you have those in Ireland, but
We do,
anyway, mixture of codeine and ibuprofen.
Yeah.
To get to the level I needed to get, I was taking industrial quantities of them, and obviously that was costing a lot of money because they were £8-9 for 32.
What do you mean exactly by industrial quantities? How many are we talking?
I was 2 packets a day of those.
24 per packet?
32 per packet. So I was taking, this is when it's at its worst. My tolerance levels, if someone tried to take that wasn't at the tolerance levels, and this is the same with alcohol as well, obviously, then it would kill them. That's how bad it was. I would take that over a day, and that would just keep me, it wouldn't even get me high. That would just keep me on an even keel and stop me going into withdrawal for that day.
So your alcohol is accelerating, your alcohol use is accelerating along a parallel line to acceleration in the codeine use.
Especially when I couldn't get hold of the codeine, because I got banned from chemists in the area because they got wise to it as well. Now, bear in mind that I'm in a suit. People know me in the area for managing restaurants and hotel in the area. And I'm trying to shop for these, and they're knocking me back at the various chemists.
At the pharmacies, And
I was banned from, and I'm not proud about this at all, but this is the reality of addiction. I used to spend, because obsession comes on you then, when you're addicted like that, you're obsessed. All you really care about, you wake up in the morning and your first thought is, where am I going to get my hit? Where am I going to get the money for it? Who am I going to borrow it off? Where am I going to steal it from? How am I going to get out to buy it? Because I had to make an excuse to go and drive around chemists to buy this stuff. And then I discovered a way of getting hold. This is when it was really at its worst. And this would be, I suppose I'd be about 43 by this time. And I discovered someone who could get hold of heroin, which was smoked. So, I would smoke it. And that was a much cheaper way for me to do it. So I would supplement. If I couldn't get that, I'd go for the Nurofen Plus. It was horrendous. It was a horror show. And my family was starting to notice at this time, obviously something was badly wrong, because I just wasn't present. I was, and money was going missing, and it was just awful.
So were you getting heroin from street dealers?
I knew someone in the pub who knew someone. So I used to just have to go and get it from this bloke. It was like I wasn't going. Although it would have, if I couldn't have got hold of it at a certain stage, it wouldn't have been long before I was trawling streets to try and get hold of it. That was the way it was. That was reality of it. But nothing else mattered. I put the alcohol and the drugs before everything in my life. I lost at that time, and it wasn't the last time it happened, but at this particular time, I lost every shred of dignity and integrity and honesty it's stripped much quicker than alcohol has ever done. Opiates strip everything away at a much faster rate. I sold all my jewelry that was also very sentimental, that my family had bought me over years. My wife had bought me for my 40th, this beautiful gold chain with a diamond on it. Sold it. It had reached. So there was an intervention basically at that stage.
So your family would have, your wife and family would have noticed this behavior. And then they made an intervention, right? So what happened
basically there? Well, it was discussed, a family meeting, if you like, and that involved my mother at that time, who was managing to hold her life together, and my grandmother, about me going into rehab, a residential rehab, and there was a rehab in Luton called the Perry Clayman Clinic, and I was booked in there for a 3-month period of time residentially, where everything was taken from me, if you like. There was no communication. It was a really strict 12-step rehab.
It's not like you're committed though. You could have left at any point, right? Yeah. Could
have been thrown out as well at any point, because there was drug test and alcohol testing every day there. It was very strict. But I think people make a lot of talk about rock bottom, and everyone's rock bottom is different. And this wasn't my rock bottom yet. Although
Right.
at that point in time, I believed it was, if you know what I mean, because I'd lost everything. I couldn't talk to my family. I was in this place. I was mixing with, and I will be blunt about it at this time, because my ego was massive at this time. You know, I hadn't lost that at all, unfortunately. Didn't have any humility, and I was mixing with street dealers and prostitutes, and because this rehab took people from prison to stop them having prison sentences. That's why it was you know, it was fairly cheap, if you like, as far as rehabs go. I think it was £5,000 for 3 months, and it did me. I've got to be honest with you. After that initial, I got taken to one side by the boss of the rehab, because I was not mixing at all well with them, and said, "You better lose your fucking ego, son, otherwise you're not going to last 5 minutes in here." So that was.
You felt kind of better than the people that were in there with you.
I did. Unfortunately, that's exactly how I felt, and nothing could be further from the truth. And but that's what addicts are like, you know. Until the ego strips away, you can't really move forward. You know, it was in the end there, and it was my first introduction to 12-step, a 12-step program as well at that time. So I came out of there 3 months later. Evangelical is the word I was using.
You found God?
Well, no. I'm not a religious man. I'm a spiritual man, not a religious man, because that was always one thing that worried me about sort of AA and NA and all that. The God side of it, and the you know, all that sort of stuff, the cult people talk about. But again, that's a long way from the truth. And I've always been a spiritual person, but not religious. When I say evangelical about my recovery, you know, I shoved it down everyone's throat.
And tell me then, you would have had either a sponsor or somebody you could, when you came out of AA, which is an abstinence-based program, 100% abstinence, and then you have somebody you can talk to when you're feeling vulnerable, right? When you're out of the AA.
Yeah.
So.
The sponsors. First stop would be a sponsor, and then, but also many other people who are within the rooms that you could talk to, that you sort of network with.
Yeah.
But I didn't really embrace it, Conor, at all. I paid it lip service.
Right. When you say you paid it lip service, so you didn't embrace the philosophy of abstinence-based recovery of the AA when you were on the outside, when you were out of the program? No,
not well. I didn't do what it takes. You need to do whatever it takes in that program, as I've discovered recently. But at that point in time, I wasn't prepared to do whatever it takes. So I didn't put the work in that was necessary, that I needed to put in on a daily basis. So when I came out, I might have been evangelical for the first few weeks.
Yeah.
But I hadn't dealt with any of the issues that put me in there in the first place. So, and I stopped putting the work in that was required, and just went backwards and back to square one again.
But where were you financially then in terms of work when you came out? Did you go back?
No, that was there was my wife is still doing it very, very successfully now.
Right.
I might add, wonderful. And one thing I will say about at this point about my family, but I think which is really important for any addict, they have never abandoned me. They've always supported me, and I couldn't have done anything without them that I've done. However, there have been times when they've had to let me go, and that is the important thing, I think, for any families of addicts, because and you'll know this anyway, but until the addict is ready, no amount of convincing. I mean, I've had my children crying, begging me to stop before I kill myself. And all that's been on my mind is where I can go and get a drink quickly after they finish speaking to me. You know, it's like they have to let you go at a certain point, because it's the best thing they can do. And they did do that. And but they never abandoned me. I knew they were always there, and they're massively back in my life now, thank God. But at that point,
did they forgive you?
have they forgiven me? You'd have to ask them that question.
Yeah.
I can't answer that. All I can tell you is that at this point in time, I try to be the best I can be for them, but most of all for myself, obviously. But they get the benefit of that, if you like. Particularly my grandchildren now, who've never seen me intoxicated and never will, I hope. But you know, they let me go at that point when I came out. My wife carried on running businesses and employed me as a breakfast chef, and then I went searching for other stuff, trying to fill that massive void that I felt inside of me still. So I went and did an acupuncture course for 3 years, a honours degree, BA degree in traditional acupuncture. And I did that.
You were married at this stage. You're still married and still together.
Yeah. Still married. Yeah, and you know, I mean, we sort of pootled on, but I was still buying stuff, codeine occasionally, and I was still
whilst doing the acupuncture course.
Yeah, I was doing the acupuncture course, but I wasn't drinking then, interestingly, because I knew my family would smell it on me.
Yeah.
So I avoided alcohol, but the addiction was my issues around my addictions were all perhaps worse than ever at that stage, because I'd reached a point where I was curling up with shame inside because I was no longer the manager of a business anymore. I was doing this acupuncture course and I was breakfast chefing. And I was just, to be fair, I was glad to be earning any money at all, and I'm glad that they'd had me back and accepted me back.
Yeah.
But this sort of pootled along with me being deeply unhappy, not through their fault, through my own issues and not resolved issues. And that went on until probably, into my 50s, I would say, where all this went on. I was doing different jobs. Because I couldn't do the breakfast chefing anymore. I did different jobs. And then I worked for a cash company delivering cash, you know, one of these security. I got fired from them. You know, it was like I just couldn't hold down a job. I was just a mess.
You were using codeine at the time, right?
Yeah, I was. Yeah, a lot of that again. That had escalated again because as
you had the alcohol under control.
Yeah, the alcohol. I just, because I was changing the way I felt with the codeine, I was doing something to feed that void inside of me, to feed that hole inside of me. You know, I was broken inside. I was like, the only way I can describe it, I was crying inside all the time. I mean, I went to the doctor. I mean, I was prescribed she said I was depressed, and at one stage they said I was bipolar, and they prescribed me Effexor, venlafaxine, quite a really high dose of it. And I was taking that with the codeine, and I just wasn't on this planet really for a long period of time. And then I went back to work for my family again. They discovered the codeine again, and we had a massive family bust up again. And then they gave me one more chance. They said, right, this is absolutely the last chance for you. Quite rightly.
What age was this at, Tim? Was this late 40s or early 50s?
No, this is early 50s. This was
early 50s. Yeah,
I can tell you exactly when it was. It was 2012, and it was August 2012. So I decided, right, I'll do it myself. I can do this. I'm strong enough to do this. I'll just stop, and I did. And we got to Christmas and everything was on an even keel again. And but I knew it was my last chance anyway. I think that might have shook me up a bit. But still none of these issues were resolved. And then I was doing this breakfast chefing. I was opening up at 6 a.m. in the morning. And I remember every single day walking past the wine fridge. There was no one in the building at all. And I was walking past the wine fridge every day. And I used to look at it. And this is how sneaky addiction is. This is how it never goes away until you've sorted it properly. It's always going to be there. And the little voice started inside my head. What if? And then this one day, unconsciously, not without even realizing it, I took 2 bottles of wine out the fridge and took them into the kitchen with me. and drank them before the breakfast. I mean, I can't even explain why I did that. And my daughter, unfortunately, my youngest daughter, was on breakfast that day, and I'll never forgive myself for it. It was, you know, as soon as she saw me, you know, she knew, obviously, because I was a fucking mess. And so then they got me out of the kitchen, took me, and I couldn't cope with it. I had a total mental breakdown, and managed to grab 20 quid out of a till, and then disappeared for 24 hours, apparently, although I don't really remember anything about it. I turned up about 3 o'clock in the morning, and they tried to phone me numerous times and had the police looking for me and all sorts of stuff. All I know is I turned up at home, I was cut and bloodied and a mess. And that was the end of it. They said, that's it, can't cope with it anymore, you've got to move out. So then I had 2 years in the wilderness, really, where fortunately we owned a little house which we used to rent out, which was empty. And my wife very kindly put some stuff in there for me and moved me in there on my own in a little village called Polesworth, which was a long way away from where they were, on my own. And that was the end. That was it. You know, for 2 years.
That's quite extreme isolation now, right?
Yeah.
So that's really a time you either confront, or it can go even worse.
Still wasn't enough, Conor. It went worse, unfortunately. My wife, I mean, they never, again, like I said, they never abandoned me. God bless them. You know, I still saw them. And my wife used to come and visit every week. She'd come and pick me up, and we'd go out for coffee every week, and that was fine. But then I'd be broken when I got dropped back off again. So I was, at this point, I was signing on the dole, unemployment, universal credit.
So this is a catastrophic. When we're talking, you're a man that had money, wealth, resources, finance, house, cars. Now we're on, what was it, £50, £60 a week?
So I think it was 70. I think 72. It came to something like that a week, which was I was 144 a fortnight.
Right. Okay.
So I mean, I didn't have to pay for any. The house was paid for, obviously, and I used to get some money for I had one of those electricity meters that you put the key in, you know, like. But most of that money just went on booze, to be fair. That's when the drinking with them was the prevalent factor, not the opiates. I couldn't afford the opiates, so it was drink.
So you're sitting at home in front of the television, basically.
Yeah. Well, I do the obligatory for the job centre, you know, do some job seeking and whatever, and just to make sure I wouldn't get sanctioned. And then I do a lot of walking, Conor. I do a lot of physical exercise. Has always been a help to me in massively today, obviously. But even then, I was doing a lot of walking and thinking. But I was also doing a lot of buying of very cheap cider. So, you know, that's where, and I wasn't eating properly. You know, I was eating shit, basically, just junk, you know, whatever I could afford. My nutrition was awful. And this sort of went on for, this was like 2 years of hell, I would describe it. And then an opportunity arose. Unfortunately, my mum had died, and my nana had died, and we had some money left to us, and there was some money came up via a pension that matured for me when I was 55, a private pension, and we'd always visited a place in Spain where I'm living now, and an opportunity came up to buy an apartment here. So my wife sat me down this one day and obviously saw the state I was in and said, well, my sister-in-law lives over here. Why don't we just buy this apartment for the family, put it in the girl's name, and you go and live there and sort yourself out. It might be a whole new environment.
What a terrific idea.
Yeah. So, you know, and I must admit that all the ducks came into a row for that. You know, I mean, the money just appeared at the right time, and the property was actually being bought by someone else, and it fell through. and it's an apartment. It's in Belmadonna, Pueblo, where I live now, which is a village just set back from the sea, very quiet.
The change of environment, the weather, everything is changing from the isolation of the cabin. Now you're moving into you get a financial windfall, let's face it, right?
Yeah.
So that's the Life Raft.
Yeah.
Out of a situation, the family gets together. And that's the support network, the social network that acts.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people, unfortunately, don't ever get that Life Raft.
No, that was not my that was their doing totally, you know, without their action, if you like, and support, that would never have happened, obviously. So that was a blessing. But came over here and obviously sucked in, you know what I'm going to say now. For the first year I was here, I just destroyed myself, basically. So it hadn't, I mean, I know this is this sort of revolving door story, but this is the reality of addiction, really, when you don't actually, when you don't deal with what's taking you there, or you don't recognize what's taking you there in the first place. So I'd found tramadol then as well, which was a drug that's sold it's an opiate drug sold in, it's now banned they're not allowed to sell it in pharmacies, but when I first came over here, you could buy it over the counter in a pharmacy. Very strong opiate. So I was knocking those down with booze. I was in a shit state.
Were you working?
And without going into all the gory details, one day I was sat on the bed at home, and I remember crying. I was in my room, isolated. Addicts tend to isolate, as you're probably aware. And I was doing all this on my own. You know, I had no network at all. I was too ashamed to let my family, although they probably knew I was speaking to them on the phone, but I tried to avoid taking any or drinking anything when I spoke to them anyway. And then this one day, it got to the point where it was so bad, and I was having to drink every 2 hours to stave off withdrawal symptoms, you know, and drop pills down me, that I just remember crying this guttural, you know, the sort of cry that you usually reserve for funerals when you've really lost someone who's dear to you. That's how I remember breaking down inside. Like it just, I was just crying like guttural tears, if you like. And I remember saying, for fuck's sake, somebody help me. And I just decided at that point, although this is the end of the story, I decided at that point to take action. I thought that was my rock bottom. And I researched withdrawal very carefully online, found out and I've made videos on this on my channel, you know, like what it actually does to your body, what to expect from it, how to get through it in the best possible way. And I wouldn't recommend this to anyone with alcohol withdrawal. Always go and see a doctor and get the correct drugs, because you can die from it and you can have seizures. But I wasn't prepared to go to see anybody. I wanted to do this on my own, which was ego driven again. And but I got everything I needed to get to do it, and I just gritted my teeth and I did it.
Just total abstinence
from a point. I'd stopped the pills about 2 weeks before. I stopped those first, so I went through an opiate withdrawal for the first couple of weeks, which was horrific. And the problem with withdrawal when you're using heavily like that is something called PAWS, which you've probably heard of, which is post-acute withdrawal syndrome. And that these symptoms can carry on for years in some cases, while the brain chemicals rebalance, the dopamine levels rebalance, etc., etc. So I did the opiate first, and then I did the alcohol. And definitely, please don't do that on your own. If you're listening to this, see a doctor. It was awful, a horrendous experience, obviously. Got through that, and then decided, just out of a whim, to start making. I was looking online at videos, recovery videos. Saw Ryan Donnelly, who was prevalent at that time. Alcohol Mastery, another channel which I got involved with, and decided to start making them myself, which I'm doing to this day.
Chronicling the journey from withdrawal point, post withdrawal, in Spain,
and right up, like saying it how it was, basically, just speaking, no gimmicks on the channel at all, just me speaking my truth honestly from the heart, and just sharing what worked for me and what didn't work for me, constantly going out and researching. Then I changed for sort of three years of total abstinence of all substances, whilst doing this and making these videos and researching and but still not realizing it, still to a certain extent white knuckling it, because there was a few really important keys that I'd forgotten. Although I was putting work into it, the whole jigsaw wasn't complete. I was managing my emotions with exercise, with diet, which I still do to this day, which are incredibly important, obviously. I was using meditation, breathing techniques, cold showers, again, which I do to this day, all important. But I hadn't dealt with the, unbeknownst to me, I thought I was coasting along, but it only takes a major issue in your life to come up if you've not dealt with stuff properly, and you've got no support network in place to knock you and tilt you back over the edge again. And for me, that was COVID, and it was horrendous here in Spain. And I'd started to walk the Camino de Santiago for charity, for a homeless charity, St. Mungo's. And it was a massive journey, and I got turned back because COVID started. I'd done about 200 miles and got turned back in a place called Merida. It was very frightening at that time because no one knew what was going on, obviously. Got back here, I was crushed because of all the expectations I had around it, and immediately relapsed. So,
after a 3-year abstinence, complete abstinence, a complete change of life. You're exercising, you're going in the sea, you must be feeling pretty kind of amazing, even though you haven't dealt with the trauma, childhood issues.
Yeah.
You must be feeling quite good. Santiago hits, you're in Santiago, COVID, bang.
Yeah.
And then there's a relapse.
Yeah. Just out of nowhere. And I'll tell you how it happened, how obsession builds up. I remember walking past, there was a bin area next to where I lived. This is how insidious addiction is. And I'd been back a few days, and I was walking. We were only allowed out for a certain amount of time during that COVID period. I think we were out 2 hours a day. We were allowed to go out and do shopping in Spain here, very strict. I was walking past the bin area, and someone had put a load of bottles by a bin. And in one of the bottles was a third of a bottle of vodka that they'd left by the bin. And I walked past this bottle of vodka for 3 days, and it was on my mind. And then the obsession started building up, until when I was waking up in the morning thinking about this bottle of vodka by the bins, walking past it. And one day I was walking back from the shops, and my child voice in my head was telling me, you can just have that, make yourself feel better. You can just have that, and that'll be it. You can control it. You've been clean for 3 years. You're strong now. You've got this under control. Just have that, and then you'll feel great for the night, and just chill out for the night. And this is what's going on, the conversation in my head, this what I call negotiating with your brain.
And plus you have the fuck it moment, what you call the fuck it moment.
Fuck it button, which I talk about on the channel, the fuck it button. And we all hit this at some point in our lives when it just gets so much, well, fuck it.
Yeah.
And just without even realizing it, I picked up this vodka and took it in. And this is how addiction escalates. The thing is with alcoholism, and I will say alcoholism now because I know I am an alcoholic. It escalates every single time you relapse. It gets worse. It's a progressive thing. So, and your tolerance levels aren't what they, if you've been abstinent for a period of time, they're not what they were. Obviously, your body. This is why so many people die when they relapse, because they go back to the quantities they were drinking before, or drug taking they were doing before, without easing themselves in. And this is the nature of the illness, if you like. And took this third of vodka, and within 20 minutes to half an hour, I was going down to the Aldi down the road buying 2 more bottles of vodka. So
had you drank that in an hour, in less than an hour?
Well, I drank the third. I drank the third of a bottle of vodka in less than an hour. Yeah, that had gone. So once the first one had gone down, and the familiar feeling of peace came over me, and all the noise stopped in my head, then I was gone. I was back at square one again.
But of course, your body, because you've been abstinent for 3 years, just isn't used to that kind of quantity.
Oh, I was fucked. I remember waking up the next morning because I dropped unconscious. I blacked out. Don't remember anything. But fortunately, my daughter, my oldest daughter, God bless her, notices these things, because I wasn't going to say anything to anyone again, and she told me to get some help, talk to somebody. I think this is where the breakthrough comes, really. I think, if you want to call it a breakthrough, and the sort of bottom, if you like, because eventually at the end of this binge, I'd ended up in hospital on a drip, and I suppose that was the point where I discovered my own mortality, if you like, and that's where this had to take me, really, for me to say probably the bravest things I've ever said, because I've never done it before. And I said, please help me to someone. The bravest thing, I think a lot of men in particular think it's a weakness to ask for. I used to, because of my ego. I can do this on my own. I can beat this shit. You know, this isn't going to beat me. I've done this and I've done that. I've achieved this. I've achieved that. But the reality is you can't beat it on your own. You have to have a support network in place. You have to have people you can talk to on a daily, hourly basis, sometimes in early sobriety, several times an hour sometimes, because that's the sort of support you need with it, particularly if it's got to that level of dependency and your addiction's so out of control. It's good. The next steps, once it's taken everything from you, your health and death comes next. It'll kill you. And I've got many people that I know who've died from this. This is how serious it is. It is life and death. And it took me getting to that point to ask for help, proper help. So I did, and I discovered a new way of, and I've been, I've discovered a new way of living, if you like, from that point on, once I'd asked for help. I'm also realizing that this was totally my responsibility. There's no one was going to ride in, if you like, and rescue me. Every change I'm going to make in my life has to come from me. It is my responsibility. No more fucking excuses, because all the excuses I made, I blamed my drinking and drug use, and I blamed on everything. You know, when I celebrated, when I commiserated, when I wanted to hide from emotions, my family, my childhood, my upbringing, trauma, a bad day, a good day, a day when nothing was happening. They were all excuses to use and drink in my mind. You know, when the dependency hits, it's obviously a different story. You have to drink. You don't want to drink. You have to, just to stay well. But hopefully it never reaches that level. But take responsibility, ask for help, be willing to change, then start to get fucking honest with yourself. Start to look at yourself and start to accept yourself for who you are and what you are, and accept life how it is and not how you want it to be. In other words, stopping trying to control everything and control other people, and it's just fighting a battle against life all the time, which was what I was doing constantly. So they say living life on life's terms, don't they? But I've learned, and also, I mean, people ask me today, are you ever going to drink or use a drug again? And I answer, I say to them honestly, I can't see the future, so I can't tell you that. But what I can tell you is that I'm not going to take a drink or use a drug today, and that's what I commit to every morning. I commit every morning to staying sober for that 24 hours. And I've found connection. The one thing that was missing from all of this jigsaw, if you like, is connection and support. however you find that connection is up to you, because no judgment at all. I've learned not to judge anything from anyone. So however you find it, there's many ways. But for me, a peer group is the best way. I'm in a program, but there are lots of programs. There are programs that are like Smart Recovery. There are groups online. There are friends. There are family. There are professionals if your issues and traumas can't be dealt with, that need professional help, obviously. But until you ask for help, until you have support in place and a structure and a program, then you can forget it. You won't, if you've got issues like I had, for instance, then you won't stay sober. You won't manage it.
There's another thing in my conversations with people, which is what keeps coming up, is the concept of meaning. And you mentioned it. Viktor Frankl mentioned it in Man's Search for Meaning, where he talks about if you haven't got any meaning in your life, you will replace it. I'm paraphrasing here, with pleasure. You will fill that void with pleasure. Finding meaning and purpose. Yeah,
absolutely. Totally agree with that. And that hole I talked about, I call it a hole in my soul, if you like. And I can remember that from childhood. Like I shared with you, I can remember having that all through my whole life. And I've only recently filled that. And it's, don't get me wrong, I'm a work in progress. I'm a constant work in progress, and always will be, probably. This is another thing. But meaning and purpose. I thought the purpose or the meaning of my life was around my work and the material world and getting as much as I could, looking after my family, and all those things are really important. But they didn't give me any real peace, purpose, happiness, if you want to call it that. For me, that has come from the work I do around volunteering, around helping and sharing my experience with other addicts and helping those and into recovery and beyond, which I do every single day now. I volunteer regularly with various charities and around the 12-step group I'm in. I give service in that. All of these things have given me, I've given my life meaning. And then on top of that, I've had the joy of being present for my family and my grandchildren in particular, their birth and their early life where I've been sober, and the joy and purpose that gives me of teaching them and being with them. But the real boost to my self-worth and self-esteem has come through the giving of my service and being there for other people. It may sound a bit corny, but that has given me more self-esteem and self-worth, because it makes me think, I'm not a bad person. And then I think someone the other day said to me, summing up the meaning of life, when you consider that it's 400 trillion to 1 that will actually be, that will exist at all. So I'll sum the meaning of life up in 5 words: is enjoy each moment in time. And that's another one of my. That's another one of my
mantras. Sorry. The COVID relapse, that was the last relapse.
Yeah, the last one, the COVID on my Camino de Santiago. I've since been, during this last period of my sobriety, what I call my serene sobriety, if you like. I've been back and completed that Camino. I went in February and completed that, which was a big achievement. We raised money for St Mungo's homeless charity in the UK. And people were very generous, and that was that gave me. We're going to go back each year and do that. That's another great opportunity for me, because another thing I want to share as well quickly, is about. It's just coming to my mind now. Someone once shared with me, and it's really important in my sobriety. The secret of your success lies in your daily routine. And the thing is, people's expectations when this is why a lot of people don't stay sober, particularly in early sobriety, because their expectations are extremely high. They go on this pink cloud business that people talk about, this euphoria of first getting sober, and they've not really dealt, they expect things to be perfect. But guess what? Life is shitty, and life isn't fair, and life isn't perfect. There'll be great highs, there'll be great lows, there'll be bits in the middle. And you've got to embrace all those moments and accept them for what they are. But the daily routine for me, small wins. When I first got sober, I didn't set my expectations too high. Literally, it was having a shower in the morning. It was making my bed. It was tiny, brushing my teeth. These were all things that I wasn't even doing in my addictions. Tiny little wins that you build on and you build strength from. So, and that routine will then build and build and build and build till it reaches habitual level. And then you need to use discipline. Fuck motivation. Because people say motivation comes and goes. It comes and goes. People, you're either motivated. I mean, I go to a gym regularly. I'm not motivated to go there every day, but I go because I'm disciplined and I go and I know that's going to make me feel good and help me. So discipline, focus and consistency around your daily routine, whatever that routine is, and you build your own routine, whatever keeps you, optimizes your sobriety, if you like. So together with the connection and the meetings I go to and all the rest of the stuff, that daily routine is key to my sobriety. You know, it's like in tablets of stone. I call it's non-negotiable. All those things in every day are non-negotiable.
Tim, what's your perspective on this concept of, and you've touched upon it already, replacing one addiction with another? So say, for example, replacing alcohol with an obsessive compulsive need to exercise, replacing tramadol with, I don't know, an interest in ornithology or something. Yeah. Is there any merit in that concept from your perspective?
I think that the addicts as a whole, you know, people who are, I'm not going to say, I don't know what the evidence is really around being born addicts or anything. I just think that you learn coping mechanisms from your childhood that you carry into your adult life. And I know that I'm obsessive about stuff. You know, I suppose there's a mixture. There's a bit of OCD involved in addiction as well. I think they sort of cross over a bit. Perfectionism, you know, and stuff like that. And yes, they, you know, that can be. I mean, I know myself when I stopped during my 30s, stopped all the drug taking, alcohol, and that, and replaced it with running because it was changing the way I felt. I think you have to look at the reasons why you're doing these things. If you're doing it to change the way you feel constantly because you feel shitty all the time, then it might be sort of cross addiction, if you like. It depends whether you've resolved those early, because for a long time I blamed that my childhood trauma, and I know people go through some horrendous stuff which they have to get dealt with by a professional person, but the type of trauma I went through, I blamed my mother for so long and my childhood for my addictions, and I've learned, you know, forgiveness is a funny one, you know, but by accepting yourself for what you are, then you can start to, I accept what happened and I accept the reasons my mother did what she did. You know, she was sick just like I was sick. You know, it's simple as that. And I've let all that go. You have to let it all go. Accept yourself and let it go. And then when you're doing this other stuff, this more obsessive stuff, it's not really cross addiction anymore because you know you're doing it for the right reasons, if you like. Where it gets iffy, where I know if I've got to work on myself, is if I start, eating's one for me. If I start buying shitty food and comfort eating and stuffing chocolate and crisps down myself and stuff like that, I know that's dangerous for me because relapses and stuff like that often happen a long time before they actually happen, if you know what I mean. They happen in the head before you realised. And so you start looking at behaviours, and that's why every single day I keep it in the day and work on myself every single day and listen to my thoughts and listen to what I'm thinking and letting go of things, you know, because if I start to abuse food like that, I know that I'm heading down a dangerous slope because I'm doing it. It won't be long before there's chemicals involved if I'm doing that. So
it could be dopamine seeking behavior, dopamine rush seeking behavior.
That's correct. But then I keep my dopamine elevated. Cold showers and cold exposure.
Wim Hof.
I mean, elevates. I don't know if you've listened to Andrew Huberman, but
I have, yeah.
His stuff, like, is really interesting around dopamine, and it's that, I've been having cold showers. I started Wim Hof years ago, the breathing and the cold exposure, and that gives me that buzz, if you like, that dopamine high, if you like, for an extended period of time, if that's what I'm seeking. But I think all humans are seeking that, aren't they? I mean, they want to feel like that when it's unrealistic. Sometimes it's unrealistic to feel like that, isn't it? Because life happens and shitty things happen. You've just got to do the best you can in the moment sometimes, and let things go. Particularly around resentment and anger and all that sort of stuff. That's what I've found anyway.
And Tim, in terms of childhood trauma and childhood issues, Gabor Mate talks at length about the link between childhood trauma and adult addiction. And he does indicate that a solution must involve investigating those childhood traumas.
Correct. Yeah.
But what's your perspective on that? Do you think it's possible, a long-term solution, without going into that stuff, or is that therapeutic stuff? It's all part of the whole package, is it?
No, I think there's unless behind every addiction, there's some sort of pain. That's what Gabor Mate says that, and that is truth. Whatever that pain is, physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, whatever, it will drive an addiction. There's no doubt about that. You have to resolve those issues which keep taking you backwards, whatever they are. And in many cases, certainly childhood trauma and childhood pain play a massive part. Because, as I said, from a child learns coping strategies and will suppress all of those feelings and emotion. You'll carry all that into your it affects every aspect of your life as an adult, because that childhood voice never goes until you deal with that childhood voice in your head. It'll always be there. Even in my 60s now, that child speaks to me sometimes in my head, and I hear him. And some of those memories from my childhood are vivid. But I've had to let go the feelings of, I'll never forget them because that was part of me. I'll never forget all this life I've had with all my trauma and addictions in it.
Would you change anything?
Yeah, well, the things I regret most, or I would want to change if I could with the snap of my fingers, is the hurt I put my children and my wife through, and my friends, and the people I love. I would want to change that. I know nobody wouldn't want to change that, but I realised that the only way that I can move forward now is by remaining the person I am in this moment in time and being the best I can be for them. My experiences and my trauma, my addictions have shaped the person I've become today. If you're looking for meaning in life, everything I've learned and everything I've been through, and a lot of it, I'm not proud of, obviously. Everything I've been through have brought me to this point where I can now help other people and pass that on. And I really don't, again, without sounding corny, I don't think there's any greater purpose in life than helping a fellow human being in whatever way you can, and being kind. And my whole ethos has changed, and I'm a great believer in neuroplasticity as well. That because I've experienced it, changing those pathways in your brain so they become your default pathways. By doing things like practicing gratitude every day, writing a gratitude list, which I would have laughed at a few years ago. I do it every day now, and my thought processes have changed. There's new pathways opened up in my brain. I'm much more a different person now, a much more positive person now in a lot of ways. I approach things in a different way. And I'm constantly learning. I think the big thing about this as well is being open-minded, open to everything and attached to nothing, as Wayne Dyer used to say.
Or Seneca said, attachment is the root of all suffering, didn't he?
That's right. Stoics. And he always used to say about something, again, which I've carried through, that to be perfectly imperfect as well. this chase after perfection. Because I was guilty of that all the time. Material perfection, worried about what other people think about me all the time, and low self-esteem because of that. And now I realize perfectly imperfect I am, and accept myself for the way I am, and realize that any emotion I feel, negative emotion and shitty days, this too shall pass. And these are all sayings which are Stoic sayings, like you say, a lot of these. Carpe diem, one of the things on my channel that I use every single day on my channel, or whenever I make a video. Seize the day. Don't be one of these people who says, I'll do it tomorrow, because it's the killer of all hopes and dreams. I'll do it tomorrow. You need to take action now before it's too late. Because if I can do it, and it's never too late to do it. You're never too old or never too late to change.
So, Tim, what does the future hold? What does the future hold for Tim Johnson?
A few more years, I hope. That's the first. That's the first thing. I mean, I want to enjoy my grandchildren first of all. I want to enjoy my family and be present for them, and be the best person I can be for them, as I say, and I'll continue to try and be that and improve myself every single day, which I attempt to do. And I'll continue with my channel. I want to take it to another stage. It involves, channel's never been one for gimmicks. It's always been me just talking. I might do something a bit more adventurous on it and take that forward a bit. What's
the name of the channel, Tim?
Tim Johnson Recovery. If you just bang that into the YouTube search engine, it'll come up. It's the only one on there, I think. Tim Johnson Recovery. And I'll continue to grow that, and I'll continue to give service and help other people. And continue to challenge myself physically as well. I mean, these challenges I do, like the Camino, where we're hoping to do the Camino Primitivo next year for charity, again, which is a really tough route, the oldest of all the Camino routes, and that'll be a big challenge.
Primitivo, that must be Italy, is it? Is it in Italy?
No, Spain, where I am, top end of Spain.
Okay.
So the Camino de Santiago, the one I walked was the Via de la Plata, which was from Seville to Santiago and then on to Fisterra, which was 1,100 kilometers. So it's a fair trek. So yeah, I'll be continuing to do stuff like that. I know, just continue to improve. Really, that's the only thing I can say. It's simple, but continue to do my best and be the best I can be. And also just to continue to be to make my environment a product of me, if you like, not be a product of my environment. Just to have impact on people and hopefully help a few people and change a few lives along the way for the better.
And Tim, where can people find you outside of YouTube? Are you on Insta or LinkedIn or Twitter?
No, I don't do the Instagram bit. I try and that's another thing. Social media is that I know it's a big thing for my channel, and that I'm on Facebook under Tim Johnson. You can connect with me there if you want to contact me. You'll see my ugly mug as you go into Tim Johnson on Facebook, but that's all really. Apart from my YouTube and that, I don't really do much other stuff on social media, because I try and I try not to get too intense on it, because it sends me down a spiral sometimes.
Tim Johnson, thank you so much. This was fascinating and very, very valuable.
Thank you very much, Conor, for having me on. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
My pleasure.